Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 298 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what are 3 cognitive behavioural therapy techniques. And it is Sunday the 24th of November 2024 as I record this. So today's podcast episode, I wanted to focus on something slightly different. So instead of a mental health topic, which can be quite theoretical and very much research based, even though actually therapy is very research based too, especially cognitive behavioural therapy. Well, in this podcast episode, I really wanted to focus on how does therapy actually work in terms of the techniques. So what are the sort of things that you might do with your client in the future once you're qualified? Or if you're already qualified, what are some techniques that you might want to learn more professionally as part of your continued professional development? Also, if there are any podcast listeners here that are going through therapy or thinking of therapy, which I highly recommend that you do if you want to improve your life and decrease your psychological distress, then what are some of the techniques that you can expect, and what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of these techniques? So this is a great podcast episode, it's really useful, and I really did enjoy putting this together. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. So the first one is, to AI or not to AI? You may remember that earlier this year we asked you about whether or not you think AI-generated psychological hypotheses were the future. In this month's Research Digest feature, Emma Young dives deeper with a little guidance from your thoughts. Artificial intelligence is already transforming how people do their jobs, and it's posed to have a dramatic impact on psychological research and treatment. AI chatbots are being used to tailor behavioural change interventions to the individual, for example, and some researchers are even suggesting that they could be stand-in for expensive human participant pilot studies. I'm sorry, what? What? No. I'm flat out against that. One of the biggest debates, though, centres on the extent to which AI and machine learning might be used to help not just investigate new ideas, but to come up with those ideas in the first place. So for starters, I'm going to gloss over quite a lot of this article because I've already given my thoughts on how AI-generated hypotheses, if they help you, then I suppose more power to you, but I've come up with quite a few studies myself now because I'm just following where the literature gaps is, what I think is going to be the most fun and what's going to excite me and actually develop my interests. So that's where I go, and that's what I generate my hypothesis from when it comes to my mental health studies. So to be honest, I'm not really sure what the need is for AI itself, because you can just read the future directions of your favourite papers, and they basically give you future ideas there. So that's something that you can do, but using artificial intelligence to stand in human participants, I'm flat out against that. Because one of the reasons why I'm actually wanting to run a small pilot study this term is simply because I want to understand, can my participants actually follow the instructions, and does this survey app actually work? That's all I want to know. How is artificial intelligence going to understand that? Also, when it came to my pilot study last year in autumn 2023. Okay, I don't know how AI would be able to help me because I wanted to understand, were my questions right? How was my measurement precision? How was the data that I was gathering? What sort of responses could I get? Because one of the main questions is doing an online survey better, or is it adequate compared to in-person interviews? Because the problem with in-person interviews is that, yes, they take a lot of time, but you can get a lot more information. So I needed to see, is doing an online survey good enough? And does it give me enough of a narrative to do thematic analysis on? That's all that I needed. So I needed actual human data. So I needed to understand human behavior at a deep, deep level, at least in terms of the response length. And AI could not give me that sort of data, or at least my current understanding. So no, I'm flat out against this idea. I think this is ridiculous. So the second one is, why being green should be sold as red, white, and blue. The way we communicate the existential threat of a climate change is crucial to spurring action. Which approach to take, however, is often less clear. Do we try to decrease people's sense of distance from climate change? Do we describe it as a catastrophe or apocalyptic? Or will that backfire and increase in empathy? These are questions that academics, journalists, and policymakers grapple with on a daily basis. While you may have been privy to such debates already, there's one angle you might not come across yet. In a newer study published in PNAS, a New York University team explores the effect of innovating patriotism on a belief in climate change, and on their findings that suggest both liberals and conservatives alike might be moved to climate change through appeals to familiar ways of life. That's something that I keep coming back to, because the problem with the current climate change messaging is that because climate change does have the potential to kill all life on the planet and dramatically change our way of life, the issue is that it invokes denial behavior because it's simply too scary to think about. Some it activates our psychological defense mechanisms, and people become a lot less interested because they don't want to actually think about it. And this is even more common when it comes to right-wing individuals and other conservatives. So it's interesting that if we invoke a sense of like a patriotism, so where people will believe that they're doing it for their country, they're doing it for the good, they're going to benefit themselves and the country that they believe in wholeheartedly, then that could actually be a very good way to actually do it. So I hope that this is something that we do adopt, because it really would help the more right-wing countries to actually spur on climate action. It's just a thought. It'd be interesting to see how this works in the future. So the last one is, making explaining less scary could boost learning. Researchers have delivered all kinds of insights into which learning strategies are the most effective. However, there's little overlap between the strategies identified as being the best and those that learners actually use. Wright, Savak, and Jane L. Risen in a new paper in the Journal of Experimental Psychology Journal, explaining the material to someone else or just yourself is highly effective, they note. But this approach is rarely adopted for students' fear that they don't know the topic well enough. The team therefore sets out to explore feelings towards explaining new material to others, and whether it's possible to increase learners' willingness to try it. So this is something I flat out agree with, because I'm always advocating for people where to teach others. For example, when my housemates actually had their physics exams in like early May and June this year. They were like, I did offer, why don't you teach me some like physics, because it's a way of like retrieval based learning, which is a highly effective way to actually teach and also remember and actually strengthen your memory paths. So you're more likely to remember it, and it's a lot easier to recall the information in the future. But like everyone else, and to be honest, I am no different, especially when it comes to statistics. I know statistics well enough to pass exams, but I don't feel comfortable enough to actually teach the topic. So I completely understand where they're coming from, because this is a scary topic, and it's very scary to actually teach someone in case you don't know the topic well enough and you end up looking like a fool. So I'm really glad that there is a future research coming out on this, and if you're interested in learning more about this, definitely check out the BPS Research Digest write-up and this academic paper, because this could be really useful, well, not only for us university students, but also at young years, and also, I mean, like, fully qualified psychologists could probably benefit to this too, when it comes to talking to a colleague or even a client about how something in psychology particularly works. So that's actually very good and very useful. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. I do have to apologise in case you can hear the wind at the moment, because we're currently experiencing a storm here in the UK. At least maybe this is the tail end. I think this is something like Storm Bert or something, which I mean is quite a like good name for a storm. But I'm not actually going to say that much on this personality, because there's not a lot that's been going on. Like I know I'm very overwhelmed at the moment, but in terms of like university and other bits and pieces, there's not a great amount to report at all. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwiley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley, or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by CBT for Depression, a clinical psychology introduction to cognitive behavioral therapy for depression. So this is an absolute brilliant book that I really enjoy, because this book really does focus on what actually is CBT. For example, how does it work? What are behavioral experiments? What are some cognitive interventions that you actually do as a part of like CBT? And that really does build upon nicely on like today's episode. We also will talk about how do CBT sessions end, and we also will talk about one of my absolute favourite topics of all time, which are behavioural experiments. These are brilliant. Or we also talk about safety behaviours. I flat out love learning about safety behaviours, because they're really brilliant. They're the biggest concern that we actually do to ourselves, and it is amazing to learn that. So I really do recommend that you pick up this book though, for the safety behaviour stuff alone. And then we also focus on what is the cognitive approach to mental health, what is the behavioural approach to mental health, and how do they merge to form a CBT. This is a brilliant book. I flat out love it, and the covers are also really beautiful too. So I really do recommend it. It's really easy to understand, it's engaging, and you're going to flat out love it. I know lots of other readers have, and I do too. So that is CBT for Depression, a cognitive psychology guide to cognitive behavioral therapy for depression. Available from all major online retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems. like Overdrive, Biblioteca, and Baker and Taylor. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you from my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can. Patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. If you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So that's nothing personal today. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what are 3 cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. So this is a lot of fun. I really do recommend it. So let's dive into it. What is cognitive behavioral therapy? So in case there's anyone new to psychology or cognitive behavioral therapy, reading or listening to this podcast episode, I wanted to take a moment to tell you about what CBT actually is. And I laughed to myself in the creation of this episode was considering how much CBT based content I've actually done over the years, including 3 books. I've never actually created a small definition of what the therapy is. Thankfully, I have a very nice paragraph in an assignment that explains this therapy from a few years ago. And there are references and everything, but because this is audio, I'm actually not going to read them out. But if you really want, you can find the citations in the blog post at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. Unquote. Nevertheless, cognitive behavioral therapy is a highly effective psychotherapy for major depression disorder. CBT is recommended as a gold standard treatment for depression by the NICE guidelines, involving a directive, time-limited, structured approach, emphasizing a collaborative relationship between the client and the psychotherapist, assuming maladaptive behaviors are learned so they can be unlearned. Therefore, the therapist and client work together to understand the client's experiences and how to overcome overwhelming problems by breaking them down into smaller components. Clients learn how to identify unhelpful and unrealistic thinking processes and patterns, maintaining their depression as well, so that they can use the techniques they are taught in the therapy to challenge these negative thoughts and change their habits in everyday life. Ultimately, CBT works by helping a client to become more aware of the interrelationships between their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, including the negative cognitive styles, a cause of depression identified by Ally et al. 1999, and the cognitive triad as identified by Beck et al. 1985. Close quote. What are 3 cognitive therapy techniques? What is guided imagery? So, this therapy technique was introduced by the father of CBT himself, Aaron Beck, in the 1970s, and it gets the client to use mental imagery to relax and help clients to deal with their anxiety and stress. For example, a therapist could guide a client to imagine a peaceful, lustrous forest and help the client to focus on the forest's smells, sights, sounds, and sensations, as well as guided imagery can be useful for clients with stress, anxiety, or trauma, with it taking between 10 and 30 minutes. Moreover, the advantages of a guided imagery is that it helps to promote relaxation and reframes negative thoughts within clients, yet some clients might struggle with the visualization part of this technique, so it isn't right for everyone. What is Socratic questioning? In this therapy technique I've heard a lot about, but no one has actually ever taken the time to explain to me what it is, and I've never looked it up until now. As a result, Socratic questioning was typically introduced in the 1920s based on Greek philosopher Socrates. Then Aaron Beck adapted this type of questioning for cognitive behavioral therapy. Socratic questioning was designed to take 10 to 20 minutes for clients with distorted thinking patterns, and in those asking guided questions to help clients challenge their irrational beliefs. For instance, you might ask a question, what evidence do you have that you failed this subject at school? Then a client can't find any evidence to support their thoughts, and this helps challenge the negative belief. One advantage of Socratic questioning is that it encourages a client to think critically about their negative beliefs, but it can be confrontational. This next comment, I say extremely unofficially, was nothing on this podcast is ever any sort of official advice. Yet this can be effective when talking with friends who are struggling with their mental health and have several irrational beliefs. What is cognitive reframing? So, out of all the therapy techniques used within cognitive behavioral therapy, this might be one of the most famous, or at least the one that I've heard the most about. Since cognitive reframing was introduced in the 1960s by Albert Ellis, as well as cognitive reframing is designed to take 5 to 15 minutes, and it helps a client to view situations from a different, typically more positive perspective. One example of this reframing could be helping a client to reframe I failed my driving test into now I know what I need to practice for next time. Furthermore, one advantage of a cognitive reframing is that it encourages a client to look at situations from a new, more positive perspective, so this reduces the stress, although this reframing might not work for deeply held beliefs. Conclusion. So, at the end of this first podcast episode in this little series, focusing on different therapeutic techniques, I want to conclude by saying that I'm really excited for the upcoming episodes. Since whether you love or hate cognitive behavioral therapy or any of the other psychotherapies that we're going to be looking at, each therapy has something fascinating to offer us as aspiring or qualified psychologists. Also, just stepping away from the blog post for a minute, originally I was going to release these podcast episodes consecutively, but because I've been too busy, too overwhelmed, and my mental health hasn't been great this week, I've not been able to write something, so I just picked up this blog post because I've already done it. So the future podcast episodes will be in the future, but maybe not anytime soon. I'm not sure, to be fair. Going back to the blog post. And when you listen to the podcast, read one of my books, or just learn about psychology, I want you to focus on that sense of curiosity. Since there are a good few areas of psychology I have no interest in whatsoever, yet I still learn about those areas. Due to one day, with one client, with one particular mental health difficulty, it might be useful. That simple piece of knowledge might be the difference between helping or not helping a client to improve their life. That is why learning, developing, and expanding our psychological knowledge base has always been flat out critical. Thankfully, it's a lot of fun too, especially when it comes to therapy techniques. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because it's always really good to actually expand my knowledge and actually learn about the different therapy techniques, which are basically the core foundation of our profession. So it's always really good to be learning stuff that I can use with future clients, and it's just interesting and I really do enjoy it. So if you know anyone who would benefit from today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out CBT for Depression, a cognitive psychology introduction to the cognitive behavioral therapy for depression, available in all of the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please check out patreon.com the Psychology World podcast, or you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Con Wiley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.